Deep in the highlands of planet Kalis, where the air was thin and sharp like broken glass and the ground never stayed still for long, Lila Morgan walked alone through the morning mist. Her boots made no sound on the black stone, even though the path was littered with shards that would have cut steel. She moved like water over rock, slow, steady, and sure. Her silver hair hung loose down her back, braided only at the ends with thin cords of dragon bone that clicked softly with every step she took. Her pointed ears shifted constantly, catching every whisper of wind, every rustle in the razor grass that lined the cliffs beside her, low to the ground and silent as a shadow. Kor followed his scales, dark as old blood, shimmering faintly with veins of electric blue. He was still young for a storm-scale dragon, no bigger than a large wolf, but his presence filled the space around him like thunder, waiting to break his amber eyes. Never stopped moving, scanning the sky, the rocks, the mist for anything that did not belong. They had been walking since before dawn. Lila had not spoken, not even to Kor. She did not need to. They shared a bond deeper than words, older than the mountains themselves. It had begun when she found his egg half buried, in the ashes of the last war, cracked and cold and humming with a dying pulse. She had wrapped it in her own heat, held it against her chest for 3 days and 3 nights, until the shell split and he crawled out, eyes wide and wings trembling. No, he was her shadow, her shield, her brother in all but blood, above them hidden in the swirling violet clouds. Alien ships circled, cloaked and silent, their sensors probing the surface below. They had come from the galactic coalition, a vast alliance of starfaring species that had long ago declared Kalis off limits, too dangerous, too wild, too alive. But rumors had reached their ears, rumors of humanoids who walked barefoot through acid rain, who drank from rivers that boiled lesser throats, who tamed creatures that even war machines feared. They had come to see if the rumors were true. Lila knew they were watching. She could feel their eyes like cold fingers on the back of her neck, but she did not look up. She kept her gaze forward on the narrow trail that wound up the spine of the mountain toward the old watchtower, a crumbling ruin of black stone where the veiled kin once stood guard against off-world invaders. The veiled kin were nearly gone now. Only a handful remained scattered across the highlands, hiding in caves and forgotten valleys. Lila was one of the last true keepers, trained from birth to listen to the land, to read its moods, to move with its breath. She had no weapons, no armor, no tech, just her body, her mind, and the bond she shared with Koran that was more than enough as they climbed higher. The mist thinned and the wind grew sharper, carrying the scent of ozone and wet stone. Lila paused at the edge of a chasm where the ground dropped away into nothingness. Below, a river of molten silver churned its surface, rippling with strange currents that glowed faintly in the dim light. The only way across was a bridge made of woven vines and bone. Ancient and swaying in the wind, most would have turned back. But Lila stepped onto it without hesitation. Kor followed close behind, his claws clicking softly on the bone slats. The bridge groaned but held it. Knew her, it remembered. Halfway across, something moved in the river below, a shape long and sinuous, with too many eyes rose from the silver depths. It watched them, but did not attack. It knew better. On the other side, the trail opened into a wide ledge where the ruins of the watchtower stood broken and proud against the sky. Lila walked to the center and knelt. Placing her palm flat on the stone, she closed her eyes and breathed in deeply. The land spoke to her in vibrations and scents, in the way the wind curled around her fingers. It told her the aliens were getting bolder. Their scans were growing. Stronger, they would land soon. She opened her eyes and stood. Kor nudged her hand with his snout. A low rumble in his chest. She looked down at him and gave a small nod. They would be ready back in orbit aboard the cloaked observation vessel commander. Zir watched the feed from the surface sensors, his avian features tense with disbelief. The female humanoid had just crossed the silver maw chasm without any protective gear, without even slowing down, and the river beast had not stirred. Not even a flicker of aggression. Impossible, he muttered. His second in command, a broad-shouldered reptilian named Grail, leaned over the console. What is she, Zir? Shook his head. I do not know, but she is not like the others we have seen on this world, the lowland. Tribes wear scavenged armor. They use crude weapons, they fear the highlands, they call it the place where death walks barefoot. And yet she walks it like it is her home. Because it is Grail said quietly. Sir did not answer. He zoomed the feed in on the dragon beside her, small but radiating an energy signature that made the ship's shields flicker. The creature was not just an animal. It was something else. Something ancient. What do you think she is doing up there? Zir asked. Grey One studied the screen for a long moment, then said, I think she is waiting for what for use on the ledge. Lila stood at the edge of the ruin, her eyes fixed on the sky. She could feel the moment the alien ships dropped their cloaks. Not fully, but enough to send a probe drifting. Down on a silent tether, it hovered just above the tree line, scanning, recording. She did not move. Kor crouched low, his wings half spread, his tail coiled tight. The probe drifted closer, its lens whirring softly as it focused on Lila's face, on Kor's. Scales on the ancient runes carved into the stone at their feet. Then Lila moved, not fast, not sudden, just a single step forward. The probe jerked as if startled, then began to retreat, too late. Kor exhaled, not fire, not smoke, but a pulse of sound so deep, it vibrated the very air. The probe shattered into 1,000 pieces before it had even begun to rise on the ship. Zir flinched as the feed went dark, silence filled the bridge. Then Grail spoke softly. We are not the hunters. Here are we, no, Zir said. We are the prey down on the ledge. Lila turned away from the sky and walked back toward the trail. Kor fell in beside her. His steps lighter now, his head held high. They had sent a message, and the message was clear. This world was not theirs to take. As they descended into the mist again, the wind picked up, howling through the peaks like a warning or a welcome. It was hard to tell, but Lila understood it perfectly. The old war was over, but a new one was coming, and this time the Deathworlders would not hide. They would rise, and when they did, the galaxy would learn what it truly meant to fear. The wild Lila did not hurry. She did not rush. She walked with the calm of someone who had already won, because she knew something the aliens did not. On Kylus, the land itself fought for its children, and its children never lost. Kor glanced up at her, his eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. She reached down and ran her fingers along his spine, feeling the hum of power beneath his scales. Soon, she whispered, and the wind carried her words across the highlands to every cave, every valley, every hidden den, where the last of the veiled kin waited. The time for silence was over. The time for fire had begun, and deep in the mountains far below, where the earth still burned with old magic, something ancient stirred in its sleep. It had heard her voice, and it was waking up. Lila Morgan was not born a warrior. She was born a listener. The veiled kin did not raise their young with swords or drills. They raised them with silence, with patience, with the art of stillness. Her first lesson came before she could walk. Her mother had placed her bare feet on the cold stone floor of their mountain home and whispered, "Feel the breath of the earth. It sleeps, but it dreams, and in its dreams it speaks." By the time she was 5, she could tell the difference between the wind that carried rain and the wind that carried warning. By 7, she could track a storm scale through the fog by the heat left in its footprints. By 10, she had bonded with her first hatchling, though it did not survive the sickness that swept through the nesting caves that winter. She held it as it died, its tiny heart fluttering like a trapped bird against her palm, and from that day on she swore she would never let another fall to the hands of those who did not understand. The purge came when she was 16. It began with strange lights in the sky. Not the soft shimmer of Kalus's twin moons, but harsh blinking beacons that cut through the clouds like knives. The lowland tribes called them sky demons, but Lila knew better. She had seen the wreckage of their ships before, half buried in the acid marshes, twisted metal and broken glass and bones that did not belong to any creature of this world. This time they came in force. Drop ships tore through the upper atmosphere, trailing fire. They landed in the ash flats where the ground was dead and silent, and from them poured figures clad in smooth black armor. Faceless and swift, they moved like machines, not men, and they carried cages, big cages, strong cages, cages lined with dampers and shock, fields and needles that dripped with sleep venom. They were after the dragons, not the full-grown storm scales. Those were too dangerous even for them. But the hatchlings hidden in the high caves, soft and new and pulsing with raw power. The off-worlders called them bioweapons, walking arsenals of fire and lightning, and they wanted them for their wars across the stars. Lila watched from the ridge above as they raided the eastern nesting den. She saw them drag 3 hatchlings from their shells, kicking and screeching, their tiny wings flailing against the restraints. She saw an elder stormscale dive from the cliffs in fury, only to be cut down by beams of blue light that turned its scales to ash before it even hit the ground. She wanted to scream. She wanted to run. She wanted to tear their armor apart with her bare hands. But her mother held her back. Not yet. She whispered, her voice like dry leaves. Not yet. They waited until night. Then they struck. The veiled kin did not fight with guns or explosives. They fought with the land itself. Lila and the others guided avalanches down the western slopes, burying 2 dropships in rock and ice. They led packs of razor wolves through the camp, their howls masking the sound of snapping necks they poisoned. The water supply with spores from the deathcap blooms that grew in the shadow caves, but it was Lila who found the last hatchling. It was hidden in a crate-marked specimen. 7, its shell cracked, its eyes wide with terror. It was smaller than the others, weaker but alive. She carried it in her arms through the burning camp, past the bodies of both kin and invaders, her feet bleeding from the hot metal and broken glass. She did not stop, not even when a drone spotted her and fired. She dodged. Rold came up running, her heart pounding like war drums. Kor was his name. She gave it to him that night as she wrapped him in her own cloak and fed him drops of her blood mixed with mountain honey. The old way. The way of bonding, not ownership, not control but kinship. He survived. The others did not. The off-worlders fled before dawn, their ships limping into the sky, leaving behind wreckage and silence and grief that would not fade. After that, the veiled kin scattered. Some went deep into the northern wastes, others vanished into the fungal forests where no scanner could reach. Lila stayed in the highlands with Kor growing beside her, year by year, until his wings could block out the sun and his roar could shake the cliffs. She thought. The war was over. She was wrong. Now, years later, the same ships were back. Not the same models, not the same markings, but the same hunger in their scans, the same cold curiosity in their probes. They called themselves the Galactic Coalition. Now not raiders, but diplomats, not thieves, but recruiters. They came with offers, with promises, with contracts written in light and sealed with lies. They visited the lowland tribes first, those who lived on the edges of the wild, who used salvaged tech and traded with passing freighters. They offered food, medicine, protection in exchange for service in their legions. They said the galaxy needed strong warriors, and Deathworlders were the strongest of all. Many refused, but some said yes. A boy named Eli from the Red Canyon tribe signed his name with a trembling hand. He was 17 and his village had not eaten in weeks. His younger sister was sick with the gray lung, and the coalition medics said they could cure her if he went with them. He left at dawn. His mother wept into the dust. Then came the girl from the Salt Flats, Nora Ellis. Her brother had been taken in the first wave of conscriptions, and she had not heard from him in 6 months. She signed not for food, not for medicine, but for answers. She left with a knife made from a dragon tooth and fire in her eyes. Layla heard of it all through the wind, through the whispers of the river, through the crows that nested in the old watchtower. She sat with Kor on the high ledge watching the trails. Below, seeing the footprints of those who walked away, she said nothing. But her hands clenched. Kor nudged her shoulder, his breath warm against her neck. They do not understand, she said softly. They think this is a choice. It is not. On Kalis, you do not leave the land. The land leaves you, and when it does, you do not come back. That night she dreamed of the old war fire and ash and the sound of hatchlings crying in the dark. She woke with her heart racing and Kor standing over her wings spread protectively, his eyes scanning the stars. Something was coming, not just ships, not just soldiers, but a test. And she knew she would not be able to hide this time. The next morning she packed a small satchel of dried moss bread and venom root paste. She strapped a bone dagger to her thigh and tied her hair back with a strip of storm-scale leather. Kor waited at the edge of the cave, his tail flicking with anticipation. They were going down to the ash flats, to the place where the coalition had built their demonstration. dome a great bubble of transparent alloy where they put Deathworlders through trials to see who was worthy of their legions. Lila did not plan to join. She planned to show them what worth really looked like as they descended the mountain. The air grew thicker, heavier, the scent of oil and metal replacing the clean bite of pine and frost. The land grew restless. The plants curled away from the path. The birds fell silent. Even the wind held its breath. By midday, they reached the edge of the flats. The dome rose from the cracked earth like a giant eye staring blankly at the sky around it. Alien warriors stood in neat rows, their armor gleaming in the harsh light. Reptilians with scaled hides, insectoids with multi-jointed limbs, crystalline beings that hummed with inner light. They watched as human teens from Earth colonies climbed electrified walls or dodged stun drones or wrestled mock predators in padded suits. The aliens nodded, impressed. Strong, they murmured. Resilient, good stock. Lila stood at the edge of the crowd, unnoticed, her cloak blending with the shadows. Kor stayed low behind a ridge, his scales dim to match the gray stone. She watched as a boy from Mars colony failed a balance test and was dragged away by medics, his legs burned from the floor plates. She watched as a girl from Titan Station screamed when a drone released a cloud of fear. She watched and her heart grew cold. This was not training. This was theater, a show for aliens who did not understand that on Kalis. Training did not happen in domes. It happened in the teeth of the storm, in the belly of the beast, in the silence between heartbeats when death leaned close and whispered your name. She turned to Karare. You ready? He exhaled a soft plume of steam, his eyes glowing brighter. Yes, she stepped forward into the light, into the arena, into the beginning of something none of them could yet imagine. The moment Lila stepped into the arena, the air changed. It grew heavier, thicker, like the sky before a storm. The alien warriors stopped talking, their heads turning as one toward the figure in the worn leather cloak. Her boots left no marks on the alloy floor, yet every step echoed like a drumbeat. Kor followed close behind, his claws clicking softly against the smooth surface. His wings half folded, his eyes fixed on the crowd. At the center of the dome stood Commander Zir, tall and sharp-featured, his avian crest raised in surprise. He had not expected an interruption, especially not from someone who carried no weapon, no badge, no sign of alliance. You are not registered, he said, his voice calm but edged with warning. Lila did not answer. Right? Away she looked around at the dome, at the drones hovering near the ceiling, at the scorched patches on the floor where recruits had fallen. She looked at the human teens standing in lines, their faces tired, their shoulders slumped. Then she turned. Taziri don't need to be registered, she said. Her voice was quiet, but it carried through the dome like a blade through silk. The aliens shifted uneasy, some reaching for sidearms, others stepping back instinctively. They could not say why, but something in her presence made their spines prickle like static. Sir narrowed his eyes. Who are you? Lila ignored the question. She turned to Korsho. Kor lowered his head, then lifted it sharply and exhaled. It was not fire. It was not smoke. It was a pulse, a deep resonant wave of sound that rolled through the air like thunder trapped in glass. The nearest observation panels cracked, then shattered. The drones stuttered in midair. Their sensors overloaded, alarms blared, then died. Silence fell. Lila walked forward. She moved to the first training station, a wall of black metal studded with electrified grips meant to test climbing strength. Most recruits used gloves and harnesses. Lila placed her bare hands on the lowest grip and began to climb. The current surged through her body enough to drop a full-grown reptilian warrior. She did not flinch. She climbed faster, her fingers finding holds invisible to the eye, her feet pressing against surfaces that should not hold weight. At the top, she paused. Then, leaped. She landed in the center of the agility course, a maze of shifting platforms and laser grids designed to test reflexes. She moved through it like she had walked it 1,000 times before, ducking under beams that fired too fast to see, stepping over pressure plates that triggered gas traps. Her body flowed like water around obstacles that had stopped others cold. Then she reached the combat ring. Here the coalition tested hand-to-hand skill against mechanized dummies that mimicked real enemies. Lila did not wait for a signal. She walked in and the dummies activated, whirring to life, their arms extending with stun prods and net launchers. She moved not with rage, not with panic, but with precision. She caught a net midair and snapped it with one hand. She sidestepped a prod and drove her elbow into the dummy's core, shattering its power cell. She used its own weight to flip another onto its back, then stomped its head into the floor until it sparked and died. Through it all, Core circled the ring, his tail lashing his eyes, tracking every movement. When the last dummy fell silent, Lila stood in the center, breathing slow and even, not a single scratch on her skin. The alien warriors said nothing. They could not. Then Lila walked to the edge of the arena where a patch of imported razor grass had been planted for environmental stress testing. The blades were sharp enough to slice polymer. The recruits had been told to avoid it at all costs. Lila stepped into it barefoot. The grass bent away from her like it feared her touch. She knelt and pressed her palm to the ground. A low whistle escaped her lips, soft but clear from the edges of the dome where the real wild began. A sound answered, howls deep and guttural. The ground trembled. Then Camazor wolves, lean and gray with eyes like molten copper. They poured through the service tunnels, tearing through alloy grates like paper. They did not attack the humans. They did not attack the aliens. They ran straight to Lila and circled her, tails low, ears forward, waiting. She stood and without a word swung onto the back of the largest one, its fur thick and coarse beneath her fingers. Core leaped into the air, his wings snapping open with a crack like lightning. He banked hard and dove toward the ceiling, tearing through drone after drone with his claws, sparks raining down like dying stars. The dome was chaos, but Lila was calm. She guided the razor wolf in a slow circle around the arena, then stopped before Zyra. This, she said, her voice still quiet but now carrying the weight of mountains. This is what we call morning stretch. The words hung in the air like smoke. Zyr stared at her. His beak slightly parted, his crest flattened against his skull. He had seen elite warriors from 100 worlds. He had watched gladiators tear each other apart in orbital arenas. He had witnessed bioengineered soldiers shrug off plasma fire. But he had never seen anything like this. This was not performance. This was truth. The razor wolves sat at Lila's feet, their eyes watching the aliens with cold intelligence. Core landed beside her, folding his wings with a soft hiss. The remaining drones hovered, broken and sparking. The human recruits stood frozen, their mouths open, their fear replaced by something else. Or maybe hope. One of them stepped forward. It was Nora Ellis, the girl with the dragon tooth knife. Her hands were shaking, but her eyes were steady. You are from Kalis, she said. Lila nodded. My brother was taken, she said. They said he would be trained. They said he would be honored, but I have heard nothing in months. Lila looked at her for a long moment, then said, They do not train Deathworlders. They break them. Nora's jaw tightened. Then teach me. She said, teach me the real way before Lila could answer. Zyr spoke. You are not just surviving, he said slowly. You are commanding the wild itself. Lila turned to him. The land is not a thing to be commanded. It is a partner. You listen. You respect. You give, and it gives back. He looked at the razor wolves, at Core, at the way the very air seemed to bend around her. And if we asked you to join the coalition, I would say no. Why? Because you see strength as something to use, not something to honor. Zyr was silent. Lila turned back to Nora and the other recruits, who now stood behind her, their fear gone, replaced by a quiet fire. If you want to learn, she said, you must leave this place. You must come to the highlands. You will have no tech, no armor, no easy paths. You will sleep in caves where the vines bite, and drink from rivers that burn. You will learn to move like the wind and strike like the storm. And if you fail, you Nora did not hesitate. I accept. The others nodded one by one. Lila looked at them, then at Corthan, at the sky beyond the broken dome. The real training had not even begun, but the message was sent. Deathworlders did not need domes or drills or approval. They needed only the wild and the will to walk it. And as the sun dipped below the ash flats, casting long shadows across the broken arena, Lila Morgan turned her back on the coalition and walked toward the mountains with Nora and the others following, and Core soaring above his roar, echoing through the canyons like a promise. The galaxy thought it understood strength. It was wrong, and soon it would learn the difference between training and truth. After the dome fell silent, the coalition did not leave. They watched from orbit, their sensors trained on the highlands where Lila and the others had vanished into the mist. They saw no fires, no shelters, no signals, just the slow movement of figures. Through the razor grass and the occasional flash of blue scales against black stone, Commander Zir sat in his command chair, his talons tapping softly on the armrest. He had sent a report to the High Council, but held back the full truth. He did not say that the Deathworlder had shattered their tech with a breath that her dragon had torn through, reinforced alloy like paper, that the very land had answered her call. He said only this: she is not a recruit, she is a force. Meanwhile, deep in the highlands, Lila led Nora and the others up a narrow path that wound through the bone forest, a place where the trees grew twisted and white, like the ribs of some ancient beast. Their branches clicked together in the wind, making sounds like whispers. The air here was thick with spores that made the eyes water and the skin itch. But Lila walked through it barefoot, her cloak pulled tight around her shoulders. Kor flew above his wings, cutting through the mist, his eyes scanning for danger. They reached a cave halfway up the eastern ridge, its entrance hidden behind a waterfall of black water that steamed as it fell. The water was hot enough to scald, but Lila stepped through it without flinching. The others followed, hesitating at first, then forcing themselves forward. Their clothes soaked their skin red from the heat inside. The cave was dry and warm, lit by glowing moss that clung to the walls. The floor was smooth, worn down by centuries of bare feet. In the center stood a ring of stones blackened by old fires. This is where we begin, Lila said. Nora looked around, her breath coming fast. She had expected pain. She had expected hardship. But this felt different. This felt sacred. What do we do? She asked. You listen, Layla said. She sat in the center of the ring and closed her eyes. The others sat around her, mimicking her posture. Kor curled at the entrance, his tail flicking slowly, his eyes half closed but alert. For hours they sat in silence. At first the recruits fidgeted, their minds racing with questions, with fears, with memories of the dome, with thoughts of home. But slowly the cave worked on them. The air grew heavier. The moss dimmed and brightened in rhythm like a slow heartbeat. The sound of the waterfall faded until it was just a hum in the bones. Then Lila spoke. The first lesson is stillness. She said, if you cannot be still, you cannot hear the land, and if you cannot hear it, you will die. Nora closed her eyes again, this time deeper. She felt it, a vibration beneath her palms, faint but steady like a pulse. The earth was breathing. Days passed. They did not eat. Not at first. Lila gave them only sips of water drawn from a hidden spring that tasted of iron and frost. She taught them to sit through the cold, through the hunger, through the fear that crawled up their spines in the dark. On the third night, one of the boys broke. He stood shouting that this was madness, that they were being starved, that he wanted to go back to the dome. Lila did not stop him. He ran out into the storm. They heard his scream an hour later. It was short. The next morning, Lila led them to the edge of the ridge where his body lay half-eaten by sky eels, creatures that smelled fear from miles away. This is not punishment, she said. This is truth. The land does not care for your pride. It only asks one thing. Are you ready? Nora looked at the body, then at Lila. I'm ready, she said. The training began in earnest. They learned to walk on glass scree without cutting their feet, by reading the wind to know which stones would shift. They learned to drink from the silver river by holding their breath and letting the current pass through them without burning. They learned to call the razor wolves not with food, but with respect, standing still until the pack chose to approach. Kor taught them to ride, not with saddles, not with reins, but by trust. They climbed onto his back one by one and held on as he leaped from cliff to cliff, his wings snapping open at the last second to catch the updrafts. Those who panicked fell, those who stayed calm stayed alive. Nora was the first to stay on all the way to the peak. She slid off, shaking but smiling. Lila nodded. Good weeks turned into months. The recruits changed. Their skin grew tougher, their eyes sharper, their movements smoother. They no longer flinched at the sound of thunder or the scent of predators. They moved like shadows through the highlands, sleeping in hollow logs wrapped in storm-scale hides, drinking dew from spider webs. And then one night, as they sat around the cold stone ring, Lila told them the story of the elder dragons. They are not myths. She said they sleep deep in the Heart Mountain, where the earth still burns. They are old, older than the veiled kin. older than the first stars. They do not wake. For war they wake, for balance. And Nora asked why would they wake now? Because the balance is breaking. Lila said the coalition will not stop. They will send more ships, more soldiers, more lies. They think we are few. They think we are weak, but we are not. Alone as if in answer, a low rumble shook the cave, not from above but from below. Deep in the bones of the mountain, Kor lifted his head. His eyes wide. Lila stood. It has begun, high above in orbit. Zir received new orders from the High Council: join or be quarantined. They would give Lila one final chance. If she refused, they would seal Kaelis under a permanent exclusion field. No ships in, no ships out. The planet would be locked away forever. A museum behind glass. Zir sent the message down, encoded. In a single pulse of light it landed at the mouth of the Cavalila. Read it without expression, then crumpled it in her hands. She turned to Nora and the others. They want an answer. What do we tell them? Nora asked. Lila looked at Kor, then at the mountain, behind them where the rumble had grown deeper, stronger. We show them. That night the recruits gathered their few belongings, their dragon bone knives, their storm scale cloaks. They stood in a line before Lila, their faces set, their eyes bright. Kor stood. Beside her, his wings spread wide, and from the peak of the Heart Mountain a light began to rise, not fire, not lightning, but a slow golden glow that pulsed like a heartbeat. The elders were waking. Lila raised her hand. The time for hiding is over. The time for fire has come, and as the first true dawn of war broke over the highlands, the Deathworlders marched not as soldiers, but as kin of the wild, and the sky filled with wings older than time itself. The morning sky over the ash flats was pale and still. No wind, no birds, no sound at all. The coalition dropships hung in the air like waiting vultures, their hulls gleaming in the weak light, their weapons charged and ready. They had given the Deathworlders until dawn to respond to the ultimatum: join or be sealed away. Forever, Commander Zir stood on the command deck, his eyes fixed on the ridgeline where the highlands met the flats. He expected silence. He expected surrender, or at best, a small group of desperate fighters armed with bone and fury. He did not expect what came next. It began with a sound not loud, not sudden but deep, a vibration that rolled through the ground and up into the bones of every being on the field, alien and human alike. It was not a roar, not a shout, but a hum like the earth itself was singing. Then the ridge-moved figures appeared at the edge of the highlands, walking slowly down the slope barefoot and unarmored, their cloaks made of storm-scale leather fluttering. In a wind that had not been there moments before, at their center, walked Lila Morgan, her silver hair loose, her eyes fixed on the ships above her, and beside her strode Nora Ellis, and the others, each with a juvenile dragon at their side. Their steps, sure, their faces calm, but it was what came after that made the alien warriors step back from the Heart Mountain. The sky darkened, not with clouds but with wings. Massive shapes rose from the peaks, their scales black and gold, their eyes burning like suns, their wings so wide they blotted out the light. The elder storm scales had not flown in centuries, but now they soared high above the ridge, their breath crackling with ion storms, their very presence bending the air around them. Zir felt his breath catch in his throat. This was not an army. This was a reckoning. Lila stopped at the edge of the flats and raised her hand. Kor stepped forward and roared. The sound tore through the sky like a blade. The elder dragons answered. Lightning split the air, not from the clouds but from their wings, striking the nearest dropship with a blast that melted its shields before the alarms could even sound. The ship listed sideways, then exploded in a ball of fire that rained down on the flats. Chaos erupted. Alien soldiers scrambled for cover. Drones launched only to be snatched from the sky by razor wolves that poured from the canyons like a gray tide. The ground shook as the elder dragons landed one by one, their claws sinking into metal and stone alike, their tails sweeping ships aside like toys. Lila did not run. She did not shout. She walked forward through the storm of fire and steel, her hand resting on Kor's neck. Nora followed, her knife in hand, her eyes locked on the command shuttle where the recruiters had taken her brother. The coalition had thought this would be easy. They had studied Deathworlders, they had tested them. They had measured their strength in drills and domes. They had never seen them in their home, on Kailas, the land. Fought with them, the wind carried their scent. The rivers hid their movements, the very air bent to their will. A reptilian warrior charged Lila, his plasma rifle humming. She sidestepped, caught the barrel, and twisted it from his hands, then drove it into the ground where the earth swallowed it whole. An insectoid commander tried to flee in a skimmer. Kor leaped onto its roof and tore through the canopy with one swipe of his claws. Nora reached the command shuttle just as the ramp lowered. A figure stumbled out, pale and thin, his eyes wide with shock. "Brother," she whispered. He looked at her, then at the sky filled with dragons, then at the woman walking through fire like it was nothing. "Who are they?" he asked. "They are us," Nora said. The battle did not last long. The coalition forces were strong, but they were blind. They fought with tech and tactics, but the Deathworlders fought with the wild itself. Every step, every breath, every heartbeat was part of the fight. When it was over, the flats were silent. Again, smoke rose from the wreckage of ships. The elder dragons circled once, then returned to the mountains. Their work done, Lila stood in the center of the field. Her cloak singed her skin, marked with ash. But her eyes, clear as air, approached alone. His armor cracked, his crest lowered. "You could have killed us all," he said. Lila looked at him, then at the sky. "We do not kill for pride," she said, "only for balance." He nodded slowly. "The High Council will not forget this." "They should not," she said. "Tell them Kalis is not a resource, not a weapon, not a threat. We are simply what we are, and if they come again, they will not find warriors. They will find the Enzir." Bowed his head, then turned and walked to the last remaining shuttle as it lifted into the sky. Nora joined Lila at the edge of the flat. "What now?" she asked. "Now we return." Lila said, "The land needs tending, the caves need guarding, the hatchlings need teaching, and the galaxy will learn in the weeks that followed." The Deathworlders did not celebrate. They did not build monuments or raise flags. They returned to the highlands, to the bone forest, to the silver river, to the quiet rhythm of the wild. But something had changed. The lowland tribes stopped trading with off-worlders. They began leaving offerings. At the base of the ridges, bones and moss and woven grass, signs of respect. The crows returned to the watchtower, their call sharper, clearer, and deep in the Heart Mountain, the elders slept again. Their duty done, Lila stood on the high ledge one evening, Kor beside her, his scales glowing faintly in the twilight. Nora sat nearby, sharpening her knife. The others trained below, their movements fluid, their eyes sharp. The wind carried the scent of rain and pine, and something else. Something old and strong. Lila closed her eyes and listened. The land was breathing, and it was at peace. From that day on, no ship dared approach Kalis without permission. No scanner dared probe its peaks. No voice dared speak of conquest, because everyone in the galaxy now knew the truth. What Deathworlders called basic training was what the rest of the stars called extinction. And those who walked barefoot through fire were not to be feared. They were to be honored. Or left alone. Lila opened her eyes and looked at the stars. They were quiet tonight. "Good," she whispered, and the mountains echoed her word back into the dark.